I was working at the hospital when I got a call that changed everything. The bank told me I had a $580,000 mortgage I had never heard of. All the documents were forged, but with my real signature, and the house was bought in my name in one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods. The trail led straight to my father's workshop. He had taken out the loans and even planned to leave me bankrupt. My mother begged me not to go to the police, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. I gathered all the evidence and put it on the table during family dinner, when the police confirmed in that very moment charges were being filed against my father. What he called family turned out to be the greatest betrayal of my life. Let me start from the beginning. That afternoon at the hospital felt routine, just the usual cycle of checking vitals, updating charts, and adjusting meds until everything shifted. I was stationed in the pediatric wing, lingering outside Tyler's room while he proudly tried to show me how quickly he could stack Legos into a wobbly tower when my phone started buzzing in my pocket. Normally, I'd let it ring during my shift, but the number was local, and something in me whispered that I needed to answer. "This is Hannah Morgan," I said softly, slipping into the hallway. On the other end, a crisp male voice introduced himself as Marcus Riedker from Cascadia Bank, his tone flat and detached, like he was addressing a tiny billing error. "I'm calling about your delinquent mortgage payments. You're 90 days behind on the loan for Highland Drive. The balance due is $580,000. For a moment, I went blank. "I don't have a mortgage," I stammered, pressing my back to the wall. He asked me to confirm details, and after hesitating, I did. Every piece he read back matched perfectly. But then came the gut punch, a salary almost double mine and a credit score well into the 700s. None of it was me, it couldn't be. My grip on the phone tightened, my breathing shallow. Highland Drive. The name clicked in my memory. That was Queen Anne, right below Cary Park, the spot packed with tourists snapping sunset shots. My dad had just been bragging about his forever view there, teasing me that I should be ready for barbecues once he was all settled in. I ended the call like a robot, but my hands shook as I walked back into Tyler's room, unable to shake the sickening thought that my name was somehow tied to that house. My little apartment in Ballard might not have impressed anyone. One small bedroom perched above a noisy coffee shop, a mailbox I padlocked after a neighbor's mail was stolen, and bookshelves sagging under the weight of too many plants, but it was mine. My life was modest, predictable, quiet, and most importantly, it was honest. My dad's world had always been louder. For years, Dorian Morgan's name was painted across signs stuck in front of half-framed houses all over King County. He specialized in restoring craftsman homes with broad porches and thick beams that promised stability. When I was a kid, he dragged me along to job sites, letting me hammer scrap wood while he barked orders at his crew. Back then, he was respected, the man people trusted with their biggest investment. But markets crash. A bad partnership after the downturn gutted his business. I watched as his pride turned brittle, his contracts disappeared, and the debts piled higher. He bristled whenever someone hinted his career was over, refusing to let his story be told in past tense. At family dinners in my parents' Finney Ridge house, he masked frustration with humor. He'd carve the roast and joke about using every tool in the box to stay ahead. I laughed along, not realizing back then that jokes could double as warnings. That memory haunted me now. He was the one who'd taught me to sign firmly, pressing down so my signature couldn't be lifted. Yet here I was, replaying a banker's voice telling me my name had been signed where I'd never put it. It felt like a crack running across our family table, widening every time I thought of Highland Drive. 2 mornings later, I walked into Cascadia Bank's downtown branch, my palms damp against the nearly empty folder I carried. A manager named Daniel Tenterson ushered me into a glass-walled office and slid a thick file across the desk. Each page was tucked into a plastic sleeve like evidence from a crime. "Here's the application," he said, tapping the header. My name sat bold across the top, tied to a salary almost double what I actually made. Then came the fake pay stubs, income verifications I never gave, and closing disclosures stamped with a real notary's seal. I recognized the notary's name from other county documents. Tennyson pointed out the deed of trust and the recorded instrument number I could trace at the King County Recorder's office. The whole thing looked heavy, official, untouchable, except it wasn't my handwriting. The signature swept across line after line, close enough to mine to make me feel sick. My muscles tightened like I was bracing for an earthquake. Whoever had forged it knew my dad's trick. Press hard so no one could lift your name. Can I get certified copies of all of this? I asked, my voice thin but steady. Of course, Tenterson said, sliding me a request form, his tone dropping lower. If you're saying you didn't sign these, you need to call the Federal Trade Commission and law enforcement. This isn't just a clerical issue. By then, I'd already flagged fraud alerts with Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, filed an affidavit through the FTC's identity theft portal, and set up a meeting with the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. The ink on those documents looked sharp, the seals official, but every stroke screamed a lie, and slipping the copies into my bag made it clear the next step wasn't optional anymore. I had to drag this into the open. Detective Ethan Hale met me in a cramped little office at the Financial Crimes Unit, a stack of folders already waiting like he knew what I was walking into. He spoke with a steady rhythm, not unkind, but leaving little room for me to cling to hope. The mortgage application was submitted from a fixed IP address in Georgetown, he said, swiveling the monitor toward me. My stomach dropped when I saw the screen. That address lined up exactly with my dad's workshop. Georgetown, the place that always smelled like sawdust, where as a kid I'd swept up floors just to earn enough for ice cream. Ethan moved on to the next file, his finger tapping the margin. The title searches show the property closed unusually fast, less than 3 weeks. And there's a scheduled cash-out refinance on the same property, same borrower's name, yours. If it had gone through, another $210,000 would have been pulled out. He paused, his tone tightening. There are also liens filed by contractors. Unpaid bills stacking high. The picture snapped into focus, uglier by the second. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment slip, it was deliberate, layered, pride wrapped up in a queen and view and propped up by desperation that borrowed my future to keep it standing. And somewhere in the middle of it all sat Clara's glossy staging business, dressed up like a home but functioning like a showroom. That night my mom called, her voice lowered like the walls themselves might tattle. Hannah, don't go to the police yet. Your father, he's proud, but he's not a criminal. Let us talk to him first. If this gets out, it'll ruin him. I nearly laughed at her choice of words, ruin, as if my wrecked credit score and stolen signature weren't already rubble. Still, I kept my voice calm. It's bigger than us now. Silence hung, heavy, until she whispered back, just remember, families fix their own walls before letting strangers in. I hung up, but her plea followed me. My dad used to say a signature was like a beam, solid enough that if you built it straight, the house would never sag. Now I was standing beneath a roof I never built, wondering how long before it collapsed entirely. Discovery wasn't the point anymore. Confrontation was. The next few days blurred into endless paperwork. I hunched over my dining table for hours drafting letters to each credit bureau, confirming fraud alerts, filling out dispute forms for Cascadia Bank's risk team, swearing out an affidavit of non-participation. Every envelope felt heavier than it should have, like sealing it was nailing boards across a door I'd never be able to open again. In Fremont, I sat with a notary to sign the sworn statement, pressing the pen deep into the page the way my father taught me. His voice echoed in my head, press hard enough, and no one can lift your name. A real line can't be faked. The irony cut sharp. He'd taught me to make my mark indelible, then turned around and used that very knowledge to forge it. Turning him in didn't feel like turning in a stranger. It carried the weight of every memory we shared. But history doesn't erase debt, and debt tied to me could smother me alive. At Detective Hale's suggestion, I reached out to Julie Grant, a title officer known for her sharp eye. She met me in her office by the county courthouse and pulled up the recorded deed and trust. The pages looked the same as what I already had, but Julie leaned in like a professor dissecting a text. Here, she said, pointing. Every instrument has a preparer's phone number most people miss. This one? It's your father's cell. My stomach dropped so fast I had to grip the chair. That kind of slip only happened if you believed you were untouchable. Flag this page, she told me, sliding over a red marker. Quartz like undeniable links. This is one. I walked back to my car holding the annotated deed like a cracked beam in my hands. The line between fraud and family was growing sharper, straighter, impossible to ignore. The law doesn't bend for blood. That night, I scanned Julie's notes, filed them with Hale, and stared far too long at the confirmation email glowing back at me. The light from the screen carved harsh shadows against my apartment walls. The case was moving forward. So was I. And the only road left pointed straight back to my father's table. 3 days later, Hale called me in again. His desk looked different this time, a folder stacked with printed emails, drafts, spreadsheets pulled from a seized laptop. He slid one across to me, no preamble. My name was all over it, attached to pre-written hardship letters begging for mercy as if I'd authored them myself. This wasn't panic, Hale said, leaning back in his chair. This was mapped out. Your father was setting you up to walk straight into bankruptcy court. He'd strip what he could from the refinance, then leave you to deal with the wreckage. The room seemed to tilt. Up until that moment, I'd let myself believe, on weaker nights, that desperation had simply backed him into a corner. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was design. Architecture built with my identity as the frame, and as I walked out of the precinct that day, my mind was already locked on the next move. Talking behind closed doors would only bury the truth under charm and excuses, just like always. If this was going to be confronted, it had to be dragged into the light, with witnesses who couldn't pretend they didn't hear. Sunday dinner at Finney Ridge was going to be the stage. I printed the police report, flagged the recorder numbers, and bound everything into a neat packet. Sliding it into my bag felt like slipping in a stone, heavy, cold, but necessary. My mom's voice shook when she called, begging, "Please, Hannah, let us handle this at home. If you push it further, it'll destroy him." I whispered back, "It already has." Minutes later, Clara chimed in with a text about optics and family walls, about how shame should never leave the house. I stared at her words until the screen dimmed, realizing that to them, my credit, my name, my entire future were nothing more than boards they could walk on, hidden joists under their feet. I decided I would not stay hidden anymore. When Sunday came, I climbed the steps of the house I'd grown up in, my bag pressed against my side, the packet ready to expose what could no longer be buried. The smell of salmon and roasted potatoes floated through the rooms, so ordinary it almost made me forget the weight of what I carried. We circled the maple table that had seen every birthday, holiday, and argument of my childhood. I waited until plates were half empty before I pulled the packet free and slid it across the table. The scrape of paper against wood sounded louder than forks and glasses. My father's fork slipped from his hand, clattering hard against porcelain. The room froze. "What's this?" he asked, though his eyes gave him away. "Police report," I said steadily. "Identity theft. Mortgage fraud. Bankruptcy papers written in my name." Color surged into his face. "I meant to refinance it properly," he snapped. "You're resilient, Hannah. After all I built, you owe this family a win." My hands steadied as my words cut. "What you built is a crime scene. You forged my signature, trashed my credit, and tried to bankrupt me to save yourself." My mother pressed her napkin to her lips, whispering, "Dorian, please tell me this isn't true." Clara jumped in, sharp and defensive. "This doesn't belong at the dinner table. Families keep things private." I met her glare head-on. Families don't steal from each other. At that exact moment, Detective Hale's name lit up my phone. I answered on speaker. His voice filled the silence. "We're moving forward with charges." The words settled like dust after a demolition. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears, torn between denial and grief. My father gripped the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles went white, his jaw clenched as if holding back collapse. I ended the call, closed the folder, and the lines between us felt cut as sharp as the knife resting by my plate. The air inside that dining room shifted, heavy and strange, and I knew nothing in that house would ever return to what it once was. After dinner, my father shoved his chair back and stormed out, muttering about ungrateful children before slamming the door. By morning, he was holed up in the Queen and house, hiding inside the shell he had stolen in my name. My mother, pale and shaking, packed a small bag and fled across the bridge to her sister's place in West Seattle. It looked like a crack splitting straight through the foundation of everything we had left. News spread quickly. Neighbors who once admired his craftsmanship now lowered their voices when they saw me in the market. Word of unpaid bills surfaced. Contractors he'd stiffed began filing claims in district court, each petition hammering another nail into the coffin of his reputation. Cascadia Bank wasted no time, accelerating the note and pushing foreclosure proceedings forward. The Queen in view that had cost me my credit was already slipping from his grip before the courts even finished with him. A week later, I stood outside his Georgetown workshop, watching as Seattle police officers hauled out box after box of files and hard drives. Seeing the Georgetown workshop stripped bare hit me harder than I thought it would. That building had once been my playground, the place where I swung a hammer for the first time under my dad's watchful eye, but now it was reduced to evidence tags and boxes of seized property. Calls from extended relatives came next, their voices sharp with accusation. "You could withdraw. Don't ruin him." I listened quietly and repeated what Detective Hale had told me. If I withdrew now, the bank and the courts would assume I had agreed all along. That meant complicity, and complicity would stain me forever. As a licensed nurse, I couldn't carry that stain. Protecting him would mean destroying myself. Every choice felt like prying another beam out of the frame of the family I had grown up inside, yet I knew those walls had to fall if I wanted a life built on something true. When the courts finally opened their doors, I carried the weight of what remained with me. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and old polish, a place where lives were measured with no ceremony. My father stood at the defendant's table, thinner than I remembered, his hands clasped like restraint could erase what he had done. The charges were read: identity theft, filing false financial statements, and he nodded, the plea already arranged. He spoke only once, his voice low but steady. I filed documents without hesitation. I assumed her consent, because family. His glance flicked toward me, but the judge cut through his excuse. What you assumed was ownership, not consent. What you called family was entitlement, not love. Her words landed heavier than the sentence itself: 18 months in state custody, restitution payments, and supervised release. When the hearing ended, I stepped into the chill of spring rain. The legal burden was his to carry now, but the cleanup of my life was mine. Cascadia Bank finally removed the debt from my record. The credit bureaus began erasing the damage, and King County filed the reconveyance after foreclosure closed the door on Highland Drive. I went back to the hospital, pouring myself into long shifts and the steady rhythm of caring for children whose battles were bigger than my own. Justice had left its mark, but one question remained beyond the reach of the courts: the distance between the name I carried and the one he had stolen. That answer, I realized, would only come in what I chose to build next. By summer, I was signing closing papers on a modest bungalow in Ballard. The mortgage was fair, the rate reasonable, and for the first time in months, every page bore my signature alone. When the notary slid the deed across the desk, I pressed the pen firmly, just as I had been taught, but this time the line was mine by choice. The first thing I planted in the yard was a young dogwood tree. Its roots settled quickly into the damp soil, and I liked knowing that each spring it would bloom, white blossoms bright against the gray skies over Puget Sound. Every petal reminded me that something fragile could also be resilient. My mother started counseling soon after, working to separate grief from loyalty, and the distance felt necessary, like bracing a weakened beam so the rest of the frame wouldn't give way. I began volunteering with a nonprofit for identity theft victims, sitting across from people as shaken as I had once been, showing them how to freeze their credit, file affidavits, and flag fraudulent deeds. Each time I guided someone through the process, it felt like reclaiming ground I'd lost. One evening, I carried the deed to my own house into the back room and slid it into a fireproof safe. My keyring now held just 4 keys: the front door, the mailbox, and the storage shed. Light, honest, nothing tied to another person's name. I locked the safe, stepped back into the garden, and watched the dogwood bend gently in the breeze. It was a quiet beginning, but it was mine, rooted in soil no one else could ever take.